Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say here on BBC World News. Well, I'm sure a lot of you saw yesterday the US Defence Secretary Robert Gates making his lack of enthusiasm for a no-fly zone over Libya very clear. But lots of you have been telling us you approve of military intervention. So what's your reaction to his comments? You can let us know at facebook.com/World Have Your Say. And we'll also put a lot of your points to the World Food Programme, who are operating on the border between Tunisia and Libya. I know a lot of you are very concerned about the refugee crisis there, and we'll get you some answers about what's happening. And wherever you're watching in the world, if you want to get in touch by text, by phone, on the blog, Facebook or Twitter, you really are very welcome to take part. Well, all being well, we're going to have guests for you in Benghazi, Tripoli, Cairo and on the Libya-Tunisia border. But before we discuss the situation in Libya, let's look at the latest developments there. We do have reports of renewed fighting between rebels and forces loyal to Colonel Gaddafi in the east and the west of the country. In the capital, Tripoli, security forces have used tear gas to break up protests, and we hear that demonstrators in the suburb of Tajura have burnt the Libyan flag. In other news, the head of the United Nations Refugee Agency in Ivory Coast has said parts of the main city, Abidjan, are now in a state of war. Jacques Franquin has told the BBC that urgent efforts were being made to help 20,000 of the most vulnerable people, many of whom have had to leave their homes. And if you're watching in Abidjan and want to tell us about the situation in your neighbourhood, the contact details are on the screen throughout the show. To China now, where the government has raised this year's military budget by more than 12%. That takes it to over $92 billion. Officials have justified the move by saying that their military expenditure is relatively low compared to other countries. Part of their plans is to launch aircraft carriers. It's also believed that advanced missiles have been developed. Mourners have been attending the funeral service of Pakistan's only Christian cabinet minister. Shahbaz Bhatti was spearheading a campaign to amend the country's controversial blasphemy law and was killed by Islamist militants on Wednesday. And NASA's latest satellite has failed to reach orbit following its launch. The Taurus rocket was carrying the Glory satellite. That was intended to analyze the effect of airborne particles on the Earth's climate. Well, we're told that liftoff in California went to plan, but NASA said it's likely the rocket fell into the Pacific Ocean while the satellite was still on board. Well, we have guests to speak to us from London, from The Hague and also from Manchester. We're also hoping to make connections with guests in Benghazi, Tripoli and on the border between Tunisia and Libya. We'll, of course, bring them to you as soon as we can. But before I introduce our guests, let me read you an email which has come in from Minnesota Mary in the United States. She says, if America was asked directly to help, then yes, we should provide help. But an infant democracy must learn to pull itself up and take its first steps. Well, let me get a response to that point from Nabila Ramdani, who's a French journalist based in London. We also have Dr. Ahmed Souaili, a Libyan living in Manchester. And last but not least, Hatem, who's a Libyan living in the Netherlands. Maybe, Nabila, I could start with you. Do you agree with Minnesota Mary that this really is a problem for Libyans to resolve?
Very much so. I think the Libyan population want democracy on their own terms. And I do believe very firmly that the US attempt to try to impose a no-fly zone over Libya is very unwise, not least of all because it's a colonial reflex, but also it is proving extremely counterproductive. We are seeing more and more Libyans now rallying around Colonel Gaddafi in support of someone who's effectively a tyrant for all the wrong reasons, because let's not forget that the Libyans still have very much in mind the US bombing as recently as the 1980s, where Colonel Gaddafi himself lost his adopted daughter when Benghazi was bombed by US warplanes. And also, I've been to Tripoli myself, and I speak regularly to contacts and friends in Libya. And the feeling there is that they do not want to see Libya to turn into another Iraq. And they do not want to see the US potentially interfering militarily in yet another Muslim country.
And Nabila, it is worth pointing out there appears to be a bit of a split between the British and the French, who are very keen on a no-fly zone, whereas the US Defence Secretary Robert Gates yesterday made it clear he wasn't so enthusiastic. Hatem, in The Hague, what's your view of outside involvement in Libya?
Well, a direct intervention from NATO or the US is definitely not welcome. At least this is my view, and I believe the general consensus is not to have a direct intervention. I, though, disagree with Nabila about the no-fly zone. The no-fly zone will be definitely productive, and it will prevent Gaddafi and his regime from bombing innocent people. And I understand the difficulty in implementing such measures, but I don't think it is rejected by at least the majority of the people. And I disagree with the comment she made. I don't know where she has seen a larger number of people gathering now or rallying around Gaddafi. I don't see that at all.
Can I just comment on these 2 points?
Of course you can.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I think the no-fly zone policy would be unworkable because you need, an overall majority within the UN Security Council to implement that. So far, Russia, China are opposed to that move, so that's highly unlikely to happen. Second of all, it's unworkable for logistical and political reasons, as David Cameron pointed out a couple of days ago. It sounds very easy to impose a no-fly zone policy over Libya, but what it effectively means, it means that it will require bombing of all the the military air bases in Libya, the destruction of radar installation, and all the Libyan airplanes.
The thing is, Nabila, some people may be watching you saying, well, maybe I would prefer Americans bombing Colonel Gaddafi's troops than Colonel Gaddafi's planes bombing military bases. That's what's happening today. There have been further attacks on military bases occupied by anti-government forces near the eastern town of Ajdabir. Khatem and Nabila, you've been telling us your views about outside intervention. Ahmed, in Manchester, you've been listening. Do you want to pick up on what they've been saying?
Absolutely. Gaddafi is bombing his own people in the east and is, as we speak, killing tens, if not hundreds of people in Zawiya. Are we supposed to just watch and wait and see how many thousands of people are killed before we impose a no-fly zone? The people of Libya do not want military intervention, but we need to stop these bombs from actually being dropped on Libyans. And also, these flights coming in from Africa. That doesn't need a no-fly zone. It needs the international community to tell the African countries to stop letting planes full of mercenaries travel to Libya. And don't forget, Libya is actually now occupied by foreign mercenaries. Now, that is an occupation, and they're the ones who are fighting Libyans.
And let me add, just before Nabila comes in, because I know that she wants to, that we do have reports that several hundred Tuaregs from Mali have gone to Libya to join pro-Gaddafi forces. Nabila, what would you say to Ahmed?
I will say that there is no question of me condoning any of the violence that's going on in Libya. I am very well aware that there are insurrections going on and they are being repressed in the most brutal manner. We agree on that. It's unfortunate and it's indeed, very horrible indeed. Having said that, on principle, I'm arguing on the principle of a military interference, it would be effectively a declaration of war and a hugely, to interfere in the airspace of a country is effectively a declaration of war. And I do not think that's the solution to the current problem.
I have to say, we're getting so many messages on this issue of outside intervention. Tulu is following us in Addis Ababa in emails. Why don't the world leaders just take action? You, the world leaders, please save the Libyan people. Stephen is in Uganda saying, let Africans sort this out. It's our own problem. And Shah is following us in Bangladesh saying, whatever happens, the United States should stay out of this situation. Well, wherever you're watching and whenever you're watching World Have Your Say, all the details are always scrolling along the bottom of the screen. You can get in touch by text, tweet, you can phone us, get in touch through Facebook as well. Before we speak to Sarah, who's a British Libyan who's got in touch from Dubai, she's got a story about her family. Ahmed, you live in Manchester, but you have family back in Tripoli. What's been their experience?
You may have heard, it's been on several news channels around the world, that my father, Abdurrahman Suwaili, who has been very vocal on Arabic TV stations asking for Gaddafi to leave so that the bloodshed should stop, he was kidnapped on Monday with 3 of my brothers. We have no word about what has happened to them. That is the kind. They were in Tripoli. My father was at his home, speaking bravely and proudly for the people of Libya. Yet this is the kind of regime which we are dealing with. We should not even be speaking to Gaddafi anymore, and we should not be legitimizing his presence. He needs to leave now.
Well, that's a fascinating issue, and obviously I'm sure there'll be many viewers wishing your father and your brothers well, but the issue of whether the outside world should deal directly with Colonel Gaddafi was a subject we talked about on World Have Your Say on BBC Radio yesterday. If you're watching and want to carry on that discussion, facebook.com/World Have Your Say is the place to do it. Let's bring in Nabila, Ahmed and Hatem. Let me bring in an extra guest to speak with you. Sarah is a British Libyan living in Dubai. And Sarah, you emailed me a couple of hours ago and we got back to you, and we're delighted to be able to speak to you on the telephone. I understand you want to speak to Nabila.
Yes, I'd like to say to Nabila that I hear what she's saying. However, given what, for example, my father this morning had to encounter, this morning he was attacked at home. He's a 70-year-old man who's staying back in Libya to look after my sister's nannies and our relatives' nannies who had to flee the country because their lives were in threat. They were threatened for voicing their opinion, okay? He got attacked today by 8 security forces of Gaddafi's with guns. They put a gun to his head and dragged him through the house while they sat there and raped one of the nannies. 2 of them sat there and they put a gun to his head and made him watch while the nannies were getting raped. These are nannies that are from Indonesia. They have nothing to do with this. He's a 72-year-old man. The world has to intervene. The world has to intervene. The Libyan people in Tripoli cannot come out in the streets because they're encountered with guns. People in Libya are disappearing. People are being tortured. People are being murdered. This is the reality. The world can no longer sit and watch. They cannot. They talk about no-fly zones. They talk about this and the other. Gaddafi, the world needs to come in and help and stop this massacre, stop this genocide of Libyan people that is taking place at the moment. Whatever methods they need to do, they need to use they need to use some action, because the words are not enough. Do they not know that Gaddafi does not care about their words? He does not care. Because if he did care about anything, he would not be doing this to his own people. This is what I have to say to the world.
Can I come in there?
Nabila?
Yes. Well, first of all, Sarah, I am terribly sorry to hear, what's happened to your family, and I do feel for you. And I think it's very tragic indeed what's happening in Libya, and we shouldn't underplay. And I am by no means trying to underplay what's going on in Libya. I think the situation is very serious indeed. You've used an interesting word, however. You said there's a genocide going on in Libya. And that's a very important aspect you're bringing in here, because I've heard similar terms used in the media as well, in media reports, journalists talking about a civil war and a genocide. As I have said, I've just come back from Libya. I haven't seen anything of the sort. Let me just stress that in the past, the regime of Colonel Gaddafi did indeed carry such horrific acts, but there was no question at the time of trying to prosecute him for crime against humanity. Now that the country is indeed filled with journalists from all over the world who are free to go about the country, I would very much like those journalists to do their work and to find instances and tangible evidence of a genocide, so we can hold the man accountable and drag him in front of the international court. And of course,
Nabila, day by day there are more journalists coming into Tripoli, and of course that increases the chances of us finding out what's happening. Sarah, I know that you've got extra things that you want to say, and I'm absolutely positive that Hatem and Ahmed will want to respond to the story you told us about your father. We're just going to pause for a couple of minutes here on World Have Your Say, and then we'll let you carry on the conversation. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. The situation in Libya by a long way remains the biggest talking point in the world. And our guests for the moment are Dr. Ahmed Saweli, who's a Libyan living in Manchester in the north of England. We're also joined by Namila Ramdani, a French journalist based in the UK. Hatem is a Libyan living in the Netherlands who joins us over the internet. And we also have Sarah, who's a British Libyan in Dubai, who emailed me a couple of hours before the programme, and we're delighted to have her on the phone. Now, just before the break, Sarah was talking about the terribly difficult experience that her father had, her elderly father, who's 72. He was attacked, his house was ransacked, and he was forced to watch one of his colleagues being raped in front of him. And Ahmed, you've also been telling us that your father is missing after speaking out against Colonel Gaddafi. I'm sure you'll want to speak to Sarah about what she had to say.
Sarah, I really don't know what to say. I'm sure we've both been going through a very, very, very difficult time. I'm a psychiatrist, and I've been able just about to hold it together. My mother is completely distraught. Just let me tell you that my father's a PhD in engineering. My Khalil is a master's degree from Lancaster University. Shtewi, who's just graduated in mathematics, and Mohammed, who's 19 years old, is a first-year medical school. They have never carried a weapon in their lives, yet they have been kidnapped by this brutal regime. And I need to speak to, Nabila. She seems to be very naive. She doesn't know or seems not to know what happens in Libya. Journalists are not free to go about and do what they want. And you'll hear today, I've been in contact with journalists in Tripoli who've tried to cover Friday prayers. They had a massive argument with the Libyan authorities, and then they were put into buses. So what Nabila's talking about, I really don't know.
Well, let's give her a chance to respond to that.
Well, let me just speak about my personal experience. As I said, I'm just back from Tripoli myself, and there is no way that I've been escorted anywhere, and I was free to go about where I wanted to. Of course, the situation is very chaotic over there. And as I said, and let me repeat it again, there is no question of me undermining or underplaying what's going on. But what we're seeing is the classic and unfortunate instance of insurrections being brutally repressed. Now, Libya has an appalling human rights record. Political dissidence doesn't officially exist, and those who tend to oppose the regime disappear for a very long time, and that is a fact. And I think we agree on that. What I'm questioning, and it's a genuine question, I'm not asserting anything firmly, I am questioning the reports that are coming from, the media reports that are coming from Libya at the moment, saying that there is a civil war taking place and a genocide.
Well,
these are very strong words.
Jumping in here, Nabila, to say that I can't speak for any other media organisations, but I haven't heard the phrase civil war or genocide used in any BBC reporting that I've seen or heard in recent days. Now, a couple of updates that I should bring you from Libya. Libyan state television is reporting that the eastern city of Zawiya is back under the control of the government. It says the masses and the popular leadership in Zawiya have managed to secure the city and wrest control from terrorist elements. All we can tell you here at the BBC is that we are aware there's been fighting between forces loyal to Colonel Gaddafi and opposition forces. We're not able to confirm what Libyan state television is saying. It's also worth adding the UN believes that some people wanting to leave Libya are being prevented from doing so by forces loyal to Colonel Gaddafi. Now, we've said goodbye to Sarah in Dubai. Thank you very much for emailing, Sarah. We appreciate you doing that. And Hatem in The Hague has left us for the moment, because joining the conversation is Bushra, who's with us live from Cairo. And Bushra, you're a teacher. Until very recently, you've been living in Libya. Tell us about how you got home.
Yeah, I've been living in Tripoli for 2 years, and I've just arrived a week ago. We get there by plane, but it was like hell. The airport is overcrowded, and they closed the airfield for 2 days. So it was overcrowded. It was like hell. It was a dream to get back home. And as soon as we get back home, you forget all the terror and all the fear we have lived through. Yani.
And we're getting lots of messages on Twitter from viewers who are saying they believe there are lots of checkpoints that may be trying to stop people leaving Libya. Did you encounter any of those? Did you hear about any of those?
I haven't met any of these, but I've met several people of Libyan people there taking advantage of what's happening and taking lots of bribes. $100 just to pass the gate of the airport, $100 to get your luggage over the plane. They're booking the Libyan airline first with triple its price, with triple the ticket price, the original price of the ticket. And if you don't have enough money, we'll just stay there forever. يعني.
And that absolutely rings true with accounts we've had from BBC radio listeners to World Have Your Say, particularly African listeners who've phoned up with any number of stories of having to pay bribes to get out of Libya. It's also worth adding, as you're in Cairo, that we know that the new Egyptian Prime Minister designate Essam Sharaf has been speaking to a crowd in Cairo's Tahrir Square. Do you approve of him replacing the previous Prime Minister, Ahmed Shafiq?
Actually, no. Actually, I was with Ahmed Shafiq. But that what happened, يعني.
Let me tell you, we've got a couple of guests who I'm sure would like to speak to you. Ahmed is in Manchester. He's Libyan. Ahmed, do you have any questions that you would like to ask Bushra?
I can totally understand that there are going to be many people who are going to try and take advantage of this situation, and it is very, very sad. But Bushra, I mean, it would be interesting to see what you have heard from other people in Libya about the killings and kidnappings. Do you know about anything about that or not?
Yeah. I think Egyptians here are hiring their houses from Libyan people. Each house and each family we know, they have one of their relatives killed or kidnapped there. Each one of them, their brother was killed. The other one, his cousin was killed. The other one, it's either from the army or the African people he brought to kill the people. Either you're in a protest and you're killed, or it's you're protecting your house and you're getting killed by the African people.
Nabila can do a body count at the end of this.
Pardon me?
Now, I'm just saying to Nabila, she can do a body count at the end of this. She's asking for evidence and saying she hasn't seen any evidence of killing, mass killing.
I've met several families. One of them, a close friend of mine, his cousin was killed in the protest, and
Absolutely.
the other one, his brother, was killed.
OK, let's give Bushra and Ahmed, let's give Nabila a quick chance to respond, because afterwards, Nabila, we're going to go to the border of Tunisia and Libya, but a quick response from you.
I am absolutely appalled to hear all that. And I've heard Musa Ibrahim, the Colonel Gaddafi's spokesperson, saying that he would most welcome a UN fact-finding mission into the country. And I do hope that Colonel Gaddafi is genuine about it and that we can get to the bottom of what's happening in Libya.
Thank you for that comment, Nabil. OK, let's shift to the Tunisia-Libya border. It's been the centre of the refugee crisis caused by the situation in Libya. Abir Atifa is with the World Food Programme there. Thank you very much for joining us, Abir. I'm looking at a message on Twitter from Gaglaw in the United States, who wants to ask you whether insecurity is stopping you from getting on with your job.
Well, definitely the security situation is on the other side of the border, is making it difficult for many of us to have access to the needs of the people on the other side. The United Nations yesterday, we've called for a safe humanitarian corridor in order to be able to assess the needs of the people inside Libya, as well as be able to deliver much needed humanitarian assistance, especially in the areas that have been kind of isolated. Some areas have been reportedly not having access to food. So we definitely are calling for this humanitarian access. The security situation is not allowing us to efficiently and in a very practical way.
And Abir, I'm just going to jump in here because we're coming right up to past and we have to bring everyone the latest BBC News. But you're staying with us for the second edition of World Have Your Say, which begins in a few minutes' time. So if you're watching and have messages for Abir Atifa from the World Food Programme, post them at facebook.com/World Have Your Say. Thanks for all of your contributions. I'll speak to you in a couple of minutes. Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to this week's edition of World Have Your Say. And of course, we're still talking about Libya. In the show, we'll discuss if a no-fly zone is practical or desirable. We're going to explore your questions on the refugee crisis, and we'll look over those opposition demands that have been released today. And as ever, we're live, and however you want to take part, whether by text, tweet, phone call or Facebook, every one of you is welcome. Well, I can see that we've had calls coming in from New Jersey, Algeria, Bangladesh, the Netherlands, Mauritius and Germany. We'll try to get to some of you in the next half an hour. But before we discuss what's happening in Libya, let's catch up on the latest developments of the day. We do have reports of renewed fighting between rebels and forces loyal to Colonel Gaddafi in the east and the west of the country. In the capital, Tripoli, security forces have used tear gas to break up protests. And we have reports that demonstrators in the suburb of Tajura have burnt the Libyan flag. In other news, the head of the United Nations Refugee Agency in Ivory Coast has said parts of the main city, Abidjan, are now in a state of war. Jacques Franken has told the BBC that urgent efforts were being made to help 20,000 of the most vulnerable people, many of whom have had to leave their homes. And if you're watching in Abidjan and want to tell us about the situation in your neighbourhood, you'll see the contact details on the screen throughout the show. To China now, where the government has raised this year's military budget by more than 12%. That takes it to over $92 billion. Officials have justified the move by saying that their military expenditure was relatively low compared to other countries. Part of their plans is the launch of aircraft carriers. It's also believed that advanced missiles have been developed. Mourners have been attending the funeral service of Pakistan's only Christian cabinet minister. Shahbaz Bhatti was spearheading a campaign to amend the country's controversial blasphemy law and was killed by Islamist militants on Wednesday. And NASA's latest satellite has failed to reach orbit following its launch. The Taurus rocket was carrying the Glory satellite, and that was intended to analyze the effect of airborne particles on the Earth's climate. Now, we're told liftoff in California went to plan, but NASA said it's likely the rocket fell into the Pacific Ocean while the satellite was still on board. OK, we're getting hundreds of calls and text messages. We're doing our very best to work through all of them as quickly as we can. Calls coming in from Dubai, Australia, Uganda, Zambia, France and the United States. And this is probably a good point to add that we have an extra edition of World Have Your Say, handily called World Have Your Say Extra. It's going to be on at 19:30 GMT today on BBC World News. The reason we brought it in is that so many of you are calling during this hour. We can't possibly speak to anywhere near all of you. So we've added another 10 minutes later on in the day to speak to other people. Now, we are joined from the Tunisia-Libya border by Abir Atifa from the World Food Programme. We mentioned this on Facebook a few hours before the programme, so lots of you have been leaving messages. Let's pull up one from Claire in Austria, who says an EU response is needed to shoulder some of the burden and protect all migrants and refugees involved, particularly sub-Saharan Africans who have been the target of racist attacks. Abir, from the WFP, how have you been keeping the refugees safe?
Well, for the last few days, since they started arrival here to the border area, the most important thing that the agencies have been doing is making sure that they have basic assistance. So over the last 2 days, new tents have been built, shelter has been provided, food has been provided by the Tunisian local communities. WFP is providing food assistance through these communities. The most important thing for them at the moment is this flight home. And for that, the UN has called for a mass evacuation plan. We're getting good response. Many of the refugees or the people who've arrived through the borders in the last few days are already on their way home. Having said that, there is still a pile of many of the people who have arrived over the last few days still in this area. Probably up to 10,000 people are still stranded here, waiting for the next flight home.
I should also mention a couple of things before I bring in Nabila, a French journalist who may well have a question for you. The first thing to mention is we had been trailing on our Facebook page that we were hoping to speak to the Libyan government spokesperson. He'd agreed to come onto the programme, but it seems that it's not going to be possible for him to do so, which is a shame. We'll try and get him on an alternative edition of World Have Your Say. The other thing to mention is we are aware that lots of you in Libya are calling. You're getting through to us, getting through to the World Have Your Say team in London. But when we try and call you back, which is what we have to do to get you on the air, none of the calls are going through. So we're not ignoring you. We're very much trying to get back to you. But at the moment, the lines just aren't allowing us to do it. Now, Nabila Ramdani is a French journalist based in the UK. Nabila, I wonder what you would like to ask Abir from the WFP.
Well, first of all, I'm absolutely staggered by the situation she's describing, and you know, the humanitarian crisis that's going on is absolutely appalling. And I was wondering if how easy or how how easy it is to get help from various governments to help their own citizens to cope with the current crisis? Are they being very helpful, or is it difficult to get their support in this difficult time?
Well, so far, the mass evacuation plan that we've appealed for, it's the UN agency, UNHCR, IOM, and other agencies. We've got good response. I think there are more than 30 flights that are ready to take on thousands of people today. We're also receiving support in terms of assistance and financial contributions. So far, the outpour of support from the international community has been amazing. But I think the most important thing is that we need to keep focused. Now that the numbers of people that have come through the border has decreased, we still need to be focused, because we do not know what is on the other side. What is waiting for us on the other side of the border? Are people being held back, or are they going to start streaming again through the border? So for that, WFP and other UN agencies continue to step up their assistance. It's a dilemma whether to upscale or downscale at this point, but the general feeling is that we need to continue to be prepared. This could continue to be an emergency over the next few days, and it could be much more complicated if we start to see more people, especially Libyans, arrive to this side of the border.
Thank you very much for that answer. Nabila's in London. Let's bring in Bushra, who's in Cairo. Bushra is a teacher who until very recently was working in Libya, but she's been telling us in the first edition of World Have Your Say of her difficult journey back home. Bushra, what question would you like to ask Abir from the WFP?
I was just talking about, Ahmed was asking about if I have any evidence about any people who were killed or kidnapped or something like this.
Bushra, before we go back to that issue, as we have Abir from the WFP for a restricted amount of time, I wonder if you have any questions for her about the refugee situation which is affecting so many Egyptians.
No, thank you.
OK, that's fair enough. Ramsey is in Algeria, who says the Americans should not interfere in any way, militarily or otherwise. Ovi's in Bangladesh, really agreeing with that, saying, I'm really afraid of a US invasion. And Mike is in the States, in New Jersey, emailing, saying, enough is enough. The world is trying to recover from recession, and we can't allow these countries to cause oil prices to surge. If you want to email, it's worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com. Matthew has tweeted us, Abir, asking whether you have a sense of solidarity amongst Arab nations in helping to deal with this refugee crisis.
Well, at the moment, the most show of solidarity is the one that you're seeing here in Tunisia. The Tunisian people have been incredibly generous. They have offered their homes, shared their little resources with the community of people arriving here to this side of the border. They've been providing food, shelter. Some have even taken some families to stay with them at home. So I think that this is really a model and a showcase of solidarity with their Arab brothers, whether they are Egyptians or Libyans, whoever is arriving to this side of the border. And I think we are also hoping that other Arab countries will help us with this emerging situation. WFP has launched an emergency response plan to be able to prepare for the needs of the people in Libya, in Tunisia, and Egypt. Let's not forget that in Tunisia and Egypt, people have been severely affected by the recent political developments, and many vulnerable families are now probably in a very dangerous situation. So we've put down a plan to help more than 2.7 million people for a value of $38 million. We would like to see Arab governments join in our cause and help us address these immediate needs for the most affected people, whether here in Tunisia, Libya, or Egypt.
Thank you very much for answering that question. Matthew in the States, thank you for tweeting us. I can see that one resident of Zawiya has told the BBC about the assault on the city by Colonel Gaddafi's forces, saying at 11 o'clock in the morning the forces arrived and opened fire immediately on demonstrators. You can get more of that account at bbc.com/news. OK, let's speak to Jalal, who's an activist in Benghazi in the east of Libya. We've been trying to get through to him for a while now, and I'm delighted that we've managed to. Jalal, welcome to World Have Your Say on the BBC. First things first, tell us about the situation in Benghazi, where you live and where you work.
Well, the situation in Benghazi is calm. We're mobilizing. People are moving eastward towards Brega and further west as well. We have recaptured most of that area, and it's being fortified. We're actually trying to protect the gains that we have made, and are trying to mobilize even further, maybe to make a further push westward.
You're in Benghazi, Jalal. So is Amel, who's called us. He's been watching us live and called in. Let's bring in Amel on the telephone. And Amel, I understand you want to speak to Nabila, the French journalist who's joining us today. What's your point?
Yeah, my point is the French journalist said that she was here and she left, that she was free to move anywhere she wanted. And she's asking the journalists that now in Tripoli to collect evidence so they can show the world that Mr. Gaddafi is committing genocide against his own people. Why did she leave? Why didn't she stay here and collect this evidence? What more evidence does she want than these people that died by the hundreds here in Benghazi? Young kids, younger than 14 years old, that died by bullets through the head and through the... Why didn't she stay here and collect the evidence instead of running back home?
Well, let's give Nabila a chance. Let's give Nabila an opportunity to respond.
I hear what you're saying perfectly well. It's very clear that the situation is very chaotic in Libya. And as I've said, I'm not underplaying what's going on. What I'm saying is that what I've seen in Tripoli is that people are genuinely terrified because they know the ruthlessness of the Gaddafi regime. They are genuinely afraid to go out and show dissent because there is no culture of political dissent in Libya, as we know. For 42 years, people have been suppressed from expressing their opposition to the regime. And we know how appalling the human rights record for Libya is. We know how ruthless and cynical the regime has been in the past in dealing with any form of opposition.
OK, so Nabila, let's give Amel in Benghazi an opportunity to respond. Amel, your thoughts? Amel?
Why?
OK, that's good.
Hello. Why she is underestimating the crisis, and that she said that stopping the airfly isn't enough. It isn't a solution. Then what is the solution? Why don't you do a solution then, instead of waiting for the people to get wiped out by the hundreds?
Well, Amel, you asked what the solution is. We also had a very passionate call from Sarah, who is a Libyan in Dubai, saying, you've got to do something. The terrible events have happened to my father. We're going to take a quick break here on BBC World News, and then we'll carry on talking with our guests, and of course with all of you around the world who are calling in your hundreds about exactly what should be done. If not a no-fly zone, then what? We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes' time. Hi to all of you watching around the world. We're talking about the situation in Libya. Recent comments come in from Mali, Australia, Uganda, Zambia, France, Malta and Saudi Arabia. Those of you we don't get to on this edition of World Have Your Say, we have a new World Have Your Say Extra at 19:30 GMT to carry on the conversation. Now, we have Jalal live with us from Benghazi in the east of Libya. And Jalal, I can see that the BBC's Lise Doucette is also in Benghazi. She's reporting that crowds are chanting, taunting Colonel Gaddafi to attack the city. Is that what you would like him to do?
Well, honestly, he's capable of doing anything. I mean, is he going to bomb the city? When and if? I hope that he doesn't do it, but he's capable of doing it. We're doing the best we can to stop him doing that. People are mobilizing, the armed forces are preparing themselves, events are happening very quickly. We're trying to catch up with them, trying to organize. They keep preempting events like the attack on Brega. So now we have to move westward while we're organizing here. So the situation is stable. We are trying our best, but it's not as easy as it seems.
You mentioned Brega. That was the city which Colonel Gaddafi's forces attacked, but they were repelled by opposition forces. Abdullahi in Nigeria has texted us to say, when Libya loses Gaddafi, I fear it will collapse. Let's bring in Hatem, who's a Libyan who lives in The Hague. Hatem, do you have a question for Jalal in Benghazi?
Yes, I do, but I would like to comment on the email from Nigeria.
Okay, a quick comment on that email and then a question for Jalal.
Don't worry about the collapse of Libya. If we will be much better off without Gaddafi. And for Jalal, I would say, Assalamu alaikum. I am originally from Benghazi. My heart goes to you all in Benghazi. I wish I was there with you. And I'm asking about medical supplies. We are preparing a lot here and we are trying to send it to Benghazi and the east. Is it more needed now in Benghazi, or can we also push it south for areas like Jalu, Ojala, and Shkharra?
Well, I think it is possible. Benghazi would be the distribution point. You can contact Sohail Latrash, who is responsible for the medical aspects of this, and he will be, I guess, in touch with the logistics to how to supply the other areas which have shortage. But if you wish to send it direct to them, I don't see there is a problem there.
Ahmed in Manchester, do you want to come in here and ask a question?
Hi Jalal, assalamu alaikum. My name is Ahmed Abdurrahman Al-Suwahli. I'm spokesperson for Libyan Doctors Relief in the UK. We've set up this group of over 100 Libyan doctors in the UK. We are trying to send supplies to the west and the east of the country. My question to Jalal is, though, Gaddafi was saying yesterday that the people of Libya loved him. I've not come across anybody who loves or even likes him. Do you know of anybody who loves him at all?
Well, to be honest with you, he's delusional. I think the point is he still has these revolutionary cells who they have records against, and they are blackmailing them unless they go out to do some sort of infiltration and spread rumors and try to carry out some of his dirty works. He will expose them, and then their situation will be quite grave. We are trying to be as tolerant as we possibly can, but I am certain that even his children don't like him.
Well, Jalal, you say that. Ahmed appears to agree with you. Let's bring in Zainab, who's just called us live here on the BBC from Libya. Zainab, what's your view of the protesters?
Hello. I live in...
Go ahead, Zainab, you're live. We can hear you.
Okay. What I'd like to say is that the media coverage is not giving a clear picture of Libya, what is happening in Libya. I live in an area that is said to be completely in the hands of the revolutionaries. What revolutionaries? I mean, this is a concentrated media campaign. These people come into an area, they hijack the place. They keep threatening the people that if they're going to oppose them, they're going to kill them. And then the army cannot come in, because if the army is going to go in, it is going to be a bloodshed.
Zainab, I'm going to jump in partly because we're right up at the end of the programme, partly because the phone line's not great, but I can hear you well enough saying you feel the protesters have hijacked your part of Libya and that they don't represent the majority. We're out of time to give Jalal an opportunity to respond, and Ahmed as well. But we're going to carry on this conversation, first of all, at 18 hours GMT on BBC World Service Radio, and then back here on BBC World News at 19:30 GMT. Do join me for both of those conversations. And to all of you who have taken part, thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.